Welcome into the Big Little Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Patrick Previty. That is Andrew Greig. Thursday night football is over. The 49ers got a win. But first, we're going to start with Miami-FSU. The game of the week, potentially for us, is just upon us. Now it is going to be tomorrow. Let's preview that a little bit. We talked about it earlier in the week, but what are you looking at for this game from Miami's perspective?
Yeah, so you come into this game knowing that FSU is going to get your best shot coming off of a loss versus Virginia in an upset fashion where Virginia storms the field. And FSU just gets up for two games, usually annually, and it's Florida and Miami. Everybody knows this. Miami's a huge rival for FSU, so you know that you're going to get FSU's biggest punch. But Miami coming off of a bye week, I think that there's a couple important stats to know here. Miami gives up the least quarterback pressures in all of the nation at only a 16% rate. Carson Beck typically has time to throw the ball if he is allowed time to throw the ball in this game. I think that Miami will be able to, at the very least, win by a touchdown, if not more. I think that this Miami team just from top to bottom has the talent to be the significantly better team in this matchup. Carson Beck is back to looking like, because of that offensive line, because of the fact that they can challenge you in those trenches, both offensively and defensively, has looked back to his 2023 form rather than his last year form. And that is a very scary quarterback surrounded by some of the best receivers in the nation, some of the best running backs in the nation. And that defensive line, including Ruben Bain, including Hakeem Mesidor, has been one of the best in all of college football. If they can get pressure and if they can avoid FSU's pressure, I think that Miami wins this one pretty convincingly.
Yeah, we talked a lot about the line of scrimmage, the offensive line and the defensive line for Miami being so dominant against Notre Dame, USF, some of the teams that they've played so far this year. It's going to be really, really important against Florida State because what are they averaging per game rushing? It's like 336 yards. Yeah, that is a number, no matter how you slice it, you know, with some of the like other lower level teams that they've played, is an impressive and gaudy number. Miami's going to have to make sure that they can rely on their offensive and defensive lines. Obviously, you mentioned that they're protecting Carson Beck really well. If they do that, and I think that they will, because they certainly have the matchup edge there. If they do that, they should be able to handle this game. The 4.5 line, the 4.5 points, I just totally think Miami's going to be able to cover that. I think Florida State's a really good team, but with the way that their defense has been playing this year, I think that they definitely should be able to cover that, win this game, control the line of scrimmage, and do exactly what we think this Miami team is capable of based off of what we've seen so far this year.
Yeah, I think that line comes from the perspective of FSU coming off that loss and just the buildup of what I was talking about, the fact that they need this win to essentially like stay in maybe not the ACC championship race, but just in general for team morale. You don't want to go 3-2 back-to-back losses, one on the road, one at home at Doak Campbell Stadium. I think that's where more of the line comes from. Also, like, betting lines usually are like skewed a little bit to the home team, so it makes sense as well. And especially in a rivalry game, they're not going to like make the line super drastic. But if you put these two teams on paper, I think Miami is at least a touchdown better. So I think that this line is at least safe at 4.5. And as somebody who actively has a particular interest in Miami, I think that's a line where I think it's safe enough to play for the weekend. I think that Miami wins by touchdown because of everything that we've mentioned. Ruben Bain is legitimately a Heisman Trophy threat, at least from the defensive standpoint. One of the guys that'll probably finish in like the first or second, as in terms of like defensive candidates towards the end of the season. Ruben Bain is an absolute dog. He like not only creates pressure, but he's the leading tackler on the Miami defense, as well as one of the guys who consistently is just pressuring the quarterback every single snap. So truly one of the best players in all of college football, and that is on a Miami defense that has drastically improved from last year. So just holistically, when you look at Miami, I genuinely like what I see. And I also think that if you're Mario Cristobal going into this game, FSU comes out from the perspective of they just lost this game. It's a rivalry game. You're going to get their best shot. But then also, if from Miami's perspective, this is the game that probably sees you into the college football playoff. And I don't think you say that to your team, but that is like widely understood that this is the biggest game that they have left on their schedule. They don't play another ranked team. This is at Doak Campbell. This is at FSU, a rivalry game. I think that those Miami guys, especially coming off a bye week, will be just as up for it as the FSU will be.
You know, a lot of crazy stuff happened in the ACC last week, so it's tough to project completely, and I'm looking at it from Florida State's perspective, on whether or not this in turn, if it, places Miami in the college football playoff or really, helps them for the rest of the year, whether or not this eliminates Florida State from the college football playoff, just simply because they won't be able to make it to the ACC championship game with 2 conference losses now. I would say that this, and so that's where I can kind of like see where you're coming from as far as they definitely, it makes sense with this line. They should be awake and ready for this game because they could end up seeing their 3-0 season turn into 3-2. And then at that point, it feels like the world is falling apart a little bit. But yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned Ruben Bain, 22 tackles for the season. This could be potentially a Heisman-esque game moment for him if he really goes off, has a couple sacks, does what he can do against this Florida State team. And he's certainly building a case for himself also to be at the top of next year's NFL draft. And I think that that's really good for him. He's obviously coming, having a bounce back year from last year after getting hurt in the first game. So that this is really good for him. And yeah, I just think Florida State, you could have this is potentially, it's really big for Miami because you could just put away a team that, in my opinion, is probably more talented than some of the other teams that have less ACC losses. And eliminating them like that would be really clutch. Now, I do also want to recognize that if Florida State does win this game, now Miami has a bit of an uphill battle to try to make their resume look even better. They're not in a place where they would be eliminated from the ACC championship game or anything like that, but it's one of those things to watch where Florida State now would have a bit of an edge going forward, but it's just something. I think it's something to watch. It's interesting. I do want to also recognize the other point as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, from an FSU perspective, this would be the game that you circle on your schedule for the rest of the season and look to and are like, wow, this game could genuinely be the point in the season that it's not a turning point, because before this they had before Virginia, at least they had a perfect season. They beat Alabama by double digits. They wrecked all the FCS schools that they played, but now that the Virginia game did happen, this is the game that you look at and you circle and you're like, wow, this can be the point where we can possibly mark our name in the ACC championship, because we have the tiebreaker over Miami. If we don't lose another ACC game, they're pretty much in the ACC championship and then possibly on to college football playoff. I know that's looking very far ahead, but this is equally as big for each of these teams. So I do want to acknowledge the perspective from an FSU fan, how big this game is and why this team could be a legitimate threat to Miami here. I don't completely see it in that. I think probably for both of these teams, it's better that the ACC is maybe not as weak as possible, because then it diminishes your schedule, especially when you're looking at how you're going to rank these teams. But that Georgia Tech game versus Wake Forest, I think that probably a loss there probably benefits both teams, because Georgia Tech is probably the next favorite to make the ACC championship at this point, and them facing a loss against Wake Forest last week, pretty unexpected. What would have been an unexpected loss would have been probably good for both these teams, and everybody would at the top would have just been kind of even. Those top 3 teams would have been even at 1 loss if Miami loses this weekend, but Georgia Tech is undefeated, so it is an uphill battle for either of these teams if they are going to make the ACC championship game with another loss on their schedule.
And Virginia is also undefeated in the conference, so those are definitely the top 2 teams, that we're looking at. So it's pretty wide open, I would say, if Miami goes down here. But let's move into the 49ers' big win over the Los Angeles Rams on Thursday Night Football. Mac Jones kind of surprising a lot of people as far as him being able to come in and be a more than serviceable backup for this Niners team, keep them afloat while they end up dealing with some of the injuries that they have. Brock Purdy, system QB.
Yeah, I think that question definitely has to be raised after this game. Mac Jones is 3-0 as a starter for this team, and I don't know if it's the system as much as Kyle Shanahan is the one who created the system, but I just want to give the credit to him, because Kyle Shanahan is genuinely. I know Sean McVay has gotten the majority of the talk in that division for the longest time, but and Kyle Shanahan has got some of it too, but he is one of the best play callers in all of the NFL, and he essentially drew up the perfect game script for Mac Jones, getting the ball out early, feeding the targets that he did have. Obviously, we know in that game, that's the reason why this question has to be raised a little bit, because of the fact that Mac Jones was able to do essentially the same thing, if not a better job, as Brock Purdy with significantly less talent. You lose Juwan Jennings. George Kittle's been out for weeks now, but George Kittle is not there. And then you're just relying on Nick Bosa, obviously, goes out a couple weeks back. So you're just relying on guys, and there's just a bunch of other guys that are just not playing for this team. So
Ricky Pearsall.
Ricky Pearsall wasn't playing, and then Brandon Ayuk hasn't played the season is the name that I was essentially looking for, and then I was going to move on to Ricky Pearsall. But all of those names, so like essentially your top 4 targets are out, and you're having to lean on guys like Kendrick Bourne, probably the guy with the most rapport on the teams from the Patriots days with both of those two guys. But Mac Jones, the whole premise around this game is Kyle Shanahan is great at his job, and Mac Jones, it looks serviceable for moving forward, especially given the fact that he's 3-0. And I wouldn't quite deem the game manager / system quarterback role on Brock Purdy, but it looks more and more like it with how good Kyle Shanahan is as a coach. It feels like he's reviving careers left and right, and he's just one of the best play callers we've ever seen in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of credit to Shanahan as the head coach here, but I also did want to recognize too that this is maybe the first time that we have seen a backup QB come in during this era for the 49ers and be able to win more games than the starter. And I say that, maybe there's been a couple instances, but really it was Jimmy G held the starting position for so long just simply because the next guy who came in wasn't able to win the same amount of games. And you weren't saying that they were winning games because of Jimmy G, but simply put, the second and third guys weren't going to be able to win as many games as the starter. And then I think we saw that with Brock Purdy from time, if he's, missed some games here and there. But this is the first time I really want to say that the backup QB has come in and they've been able to withstand some of the injuries that they've also had in the roster. Whether that's defense or through to their wide receiver core. So I think it's really impressive. I think it's almost more about Mac Jones. I think that he's almost playing himself into a second starting opportunity somewhere around the league. We look at the 2026 NFL draft and we're not impressed. Maybe he could be a guy who ends up turning into a starter and gets that second chance. We've seen it with a ton of different guys, Sam Darnold, Geno Smith. Now say what you want about those individuals, certainly about their ceiling, but Mac Jones could potentially be a guy if he continues to get opportunities like this throughout this year and he closes, with his final game being something like this. I could see him getting a contract in the offseason, or at least he's going to be a premium backup at this point. And I'm sure the 49ers would want to keep him in-house because this is great. We were talking about what could potentially this season end up being for the 49ers since they had so many injuries, and now they're sitting at 4-1 at the top of the division.
Yeah, I mean, and who would really have expected this at this point coming off of that Jaguars game? The 49ers just simply didn't look that great. And then you get the news that your starting quarterback is back out. You have to lean back on Mac Jones, who had been good in the 2.25 games that he played. But what are you really expecting out of him versus a Rams defense that is probably a top 5 unit in all of the NFL? And he literally goes down first 2 drives, 2 touchdowns. It looks really good in both those drives. I think he started 11 for 13 and then ended up skipping forward. He ended up finishing with 300 plus yards in overtime. That was an exciting game. So I want to give the credit where it's due. And I think that Mac Jones definitely deserves a lot of it. And just in general, that defense also stepped up to the plate. Obviously there was a lot of talk about Puka Nacua going into this game. And obviously he still had 10 catches. He was just his regular self. But I think that this defense weathered the storm as much as they possibly could. The Kyron Williams fumble, or it wasn't even on his part though, the forced fumble that 49ers got back towards the end of the game was very impactful, given the fact that the Rams would have went back up in that scenario had Kyron Williams been able to punch out the ball. Just holistically a very good game from the 49ers and just a lot of what you want to see in a team that is looking to compete moving forward, especially if they can get some of those guys back. George Kittle should be back at some point in the season. Ricky Pearsall, his injury isn't crazy serious. And then Brandon Ayuk at some point during the season. So if that team is completely healthy, they're already 4-1 and the schedule moving forward is also favorable. They're 3-0 in the division. And I want to give credit where it's due because they've won a lot of games, or they've won a couple games now that they probably shouldn't have, and shout out to them, I guess.
All right, let's move into the rest of the weekend. Let's talk about some of the games that maybe we're potentially looking forward to most, just from a fun football fan perspective.
Yeah, so there's a couple for me. I wanted to start off with Vikings Browns, which I know looking at that game from as somebody who didn't let Pat in on the know for some of the games that I was going to pick. I think Vikings Browns is just interesting because at what point does Dylan Gabriel play like either really good that he completely wins that starting job over, or plays completely terrible where the Shedeur Sanders mouthing to the reporters in the locker room or anything else gets to be more serious? And at what point could we either see Dylan Gabriel be the starter for the rest of the season or decide that it is Shedeur time? So I'm very interested to see the manner in which this game goes, especially because it is the primetime game this week, at least the 9:30 a.m. game. So Browns versus Vikings is one of those games where I'm actually looking forward to. The Browns have a good defense, and if Dylan Gabriel can play either sufficient or really terribly, I think that is of interest to like everybody in the league, just to see where Shedeur lands eventually. And then the Vikings have a good defense, and we'll see what the Carson Wentz can do, but I guess we'll see. And then another one that I was really excited about was Broncos Eagles. I think that the Eagles are on upset alert this week. I think that they've gone through an undefeated schedule by the just by the edge of everything. I guess the Rams game they probably shouldn't have won, and that Bucks game they ended up escaping too. So I think that this is the week that they finally go down at home, and the Broncos again are maybe had that get right game against the Bengals last week. They completely dominated that game, and the defense seemed to be clicking more than they had been over the first couple weeks. And Bo Nix looked better than he had been. RJ Harvey resurgence might be a thing, and J.K. Dobbins was the first 100-yard rusher in like 2 to 3 years for the Broncos. So I'm excited to see that game, especially because I think it's two of the better teams in the NFL, two playoff teams at least.
Yeah, I think the Eagles are definitely due for a loss in a sense right now. They definitely have been escaping just barely against some of these teams, and the Broncos are a good team. And I think that, I agree with that assessment there. And then also, yeah, the Browns right now in the quarterback situation is getting to a point where after the recent stuff with Shedeur Sanders, where you're looking at, hey, can Dylan Gabriel be the guy? He's going to get his chance, and we're going to potentially know, by Sunday, whether or not he's going to stick as that number one guy. I mean, potentially he could only get one game here before they end up moving to Shedeur if he plays awful. So I'm looking forward to that as well. So, but initially when you had said it, it surprised me. But I'll go college here. Texas, Florida. I'm interested for both teams, where Florida they're at a different part of. It's like a tale of two teams here. Texas should be able to win this game. They're favored by a touchdown or 6.5. And it's just one of those things where you'd like them to win by more. You'd like them to put up a ton of points here and to take care of business. Just wipe your hands clean of the first start of this year and take down a team that has their season spiraling. If they don't do that, now it's time that they drop. And they go. I think even with the win, if it looks extremely unimpressive, depending on whatever happens in front of them, they could end up getting jumped by a lot of different teams that win this week, and I could see them falling down. And then also for Florida's perspective, they've got Texas A&M after this week. Is this the moment that Billy Napier gets fired? If Florida really does get handled in this game, is this where you look at how players are playing for him? I feel like they've played hard. The defense has been there. Is this a game where things really start to come undone? And then you look at it and you say, okay, maybe it's time for us to go in a different direction. I could see both of those happening. I could see this being a close game where it's, like 18-10, an ugly score. And you feel like maybe we didn't really reach a conclusion. One more week for both of these teams. But I think we're going to get one of those answers. And then I wanted to go Alabama Vanderbilt. The tide around, no pun intended, around the narrative for Alabama has flipped. Now they get an undefeated Vanderbilt team, and they should be able to handle this. They've got the guys to do it. No matter what you think about this program right now, we're going to hear a lot of Alabama praises tomorrow on College Game Day, and I just totally think that this is a win that they have, and a lot of people are going to be like, wow, Alabama's back. And that team, Florida State, by the way, that beat them in week 1, they've got 2 losses now. And you might think from a resume perspective, that certainly hurts them. But it doesn't you won't see Florida State ahead of them in the rankings again, unless Alabama were to drop more games, obviously. But like there won't be a team that has that head-to-head over them as far as maybe whenever the committee's looking at large bids. for the college football playoff. And I think that that's really important. I'm still a little bit cautious about SEC championship appearance and stuff like that, but that could be something that this is a game I think that has major implications for the rest of the season going forward.
Yeah, I think both those games are a tale of two stories on like maybe things we were quick to decide on. One being extremely correct in Billy Napier, and then the other one, Kalen DeBoer, maybe being a little bit too harsh on maybe their week one performances. We were both recalling a little bit later on in the season for Billy Napier, but by like week 3, both their jobs look to be a little bit more on the hot seat. And Billy Napier, it's just a tough climb for any Florida head coach. And looking at their schedule coming up, Texas this week, and then all their future games, Texas A&M the week after, like it's a tough road going forward. And at how many losses can Florida take before they decide that he's not gonna be the guy? And at what point do the players stop playing as hard as you mentioned? So I think that his job is definitely at this point very up in the air, if not pretty solidified as done as the head coach of Florida. And essentially, I know that some people are chanting "dead man walking" as he's walking in the stadium a couple weeks back. That could be the absolute truth. And then for Kalen DeBoer, I think that Georgia win just flips everything, right? Because you beat a Georgia team that hadn't lost at home in over 2 years, or longer than that. They had a 33-game home winning streak going into that game, and everybody in Georgia was letting Alabama fans hear about the fact that the Tide were down and Georgia, it's just the same old Georgia. But they go and get that huge win, and everything just completely flips now. You have a chance to go into a game that is more hyped up than it probably would have been if Vanderbilt hadn't beat Alabama last year, kind of avenge that loss, and probably the first really like big stain on Kalen DeBoer's legacy at Alabama, and the first thing that people were really glaring at as how do you lose to Vanderbilt as an Alabama head coach. Now Vanderbilt's ranked, they're undefeated, they have a couple good wins now, South Carolina being one of them, and you just look at that team, a team that is actually getting recognition this year, and if you can just absolutely do what Alabama's supposed to do to Vanderbilt, Kalen DeBoer probably gets a lot of praise, and Alabama looks at like a serious contender for the college football playoff, and not only just that, like possibly getting farther in the college football playoff. So I think definitely 2 games that you're going to want to look out for this weekend. And on the other side of that, at least for the Alabama game, if Vanderbilt's able to win this game, they're possibly in the top 10 for one of the first times in their program history, and they look like contenders possibly, because this is a game that they're still massive underdogs in, and they're not supposed to win this game. But Pavia just has something about him, right? He's like one of the Heisman contenders at this point, and if he can get that done by himself, almost like I think Johnny Manziel is going to be at that game. So if he can pull off a Johnny Manziel-esque versus Alabama, that'd be electrifying to watch, and I think it'll be a good game, but it could start to get a little ugly towards the end of it. So we'll see. I'm rooting for a good game though.
Also, Theo Vaughn, the guest picker. I thought it was a very interesting selection. I wonder how many people maybe said no. I hate to say that, but, rooting for him to get his picks right. But I thought that was a funny little note too. But yeah, you're right. The narrative, it's changing. And when we looked at Kalen DeBoer and the rest of this Alabama schedule, it was so easy to pencil in losses for him. But this is why college football is so great. You see one coach potentially save his job this season in Kalen DeBoer, and another one in Billy Napier, who is definitely, I think he's going to be gone by season's end. I don't really see any light at the end of the tunnel here, but super underrated thing, though. I've said this now for like 2 or 3 weeks, that Florida team is playing hard. Like they're still playing hard, but the moment that doesn't happen, he's fired that Sunday or Monday. He's gone. Yeah. So should be interesting.
Yeah, that Florida's higher ups are essentially just waiting on them to get blown out by like 5 touchdowns, and he's right out the window. That defense has essentially saved his job at this point, but that offense is completely lackluster. DJ Lagway, who I wanted to just get this point out a little bit because it boiled my blood a little bit when everybody was talking about DJ Lagway was the best quarterback in the SEC. He was something like 6-0 in the starts that he had made up until that point. I just didn't see it, and obviously he came in to like his quarterback class as one of like the top 2 quarterbacks out of that class. But he's just he just hasn't put together enough for me to like go into this season and be like he's better than every other quarterback in the SEC. And that's what a lot of people were saying. A lot of people, like, it's a revisionist history for a lot of people now, because a lot of people were on the train that DJ Lagway was if not the best quarterback in the SEC, the best quarterback behind Arch Manning. So the way that whole narrative has flipped is really funny to me, because it's his stat line this season has been absolutely atrocious, and that offense just doesn't seem to get anything clicking. And it was funny also because after week 1 they beat up on LIU, an FCS school, and there was crazy one-handed catches. DJ Lagway was throwing for like 3+ touchdowns. Everybody was back on the DJ Lagway train. He's going to lead us to greatness, and now Billy Napier is very much like possibly going to get fired before halfway through the season.
Also, he's totally gone regardless, right?
Yeah,
I think he's probably going to transfer, and he'll get a lot of money from wherever he ends up going. But I think he's completely gone. But short and sweet episode today. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been the Big Little Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Previty. That's Andrew Greig, and we'll see you guys next time.